Treason is not the reason for the season. FAQ number 7, gun violence in the US isn't that bad, is it? Thank you for your question. Gun homicide rate is measured in homicides per 100,000 people. The US has a gun homicide rate of 4.4. Militia as terrorism extremists will try to downplay the level of gun violence in the United States, will try to tell you 4.4 isn't that bad, in order to convince you that gun regulations are not needed. But there are 200 nations on Earth. And only 16 nations have a gun homicide rate that is worse than the United States. Here is a list of each nation, their gun homicide rate, and a bit of history. See if you notice any pattern. El Salvador, 66, Civil War to 1992. Jamaica, 35, major drug smuggling operations. Eswantini, 37, gained independence in 1968. Honduras, 28, war to 1990s. Venezuela, 26, coup attempts to 1990. Brazil, 22, military junta to 1985. Guatemala, 20, coup 1954 and civil war to 1996. Colombia, 20, insurgents since 1960, drug cartels since 1970. Mexico, 12, drug cartels since 2006. South Africa, 10, civil war to 1990. Panama, 10, military junta to 1989. Philippines, 7, martial law in 1972. Government overthrown in 2001. Barbados, 7, self-governing in 1961. Costa Rica, 7, civil war in 1948. Paraguay, 6, military dictatorship to 1989. Uruguay, 4.7, military regime to 1984. Of the 16 nations with a gun homicide rate worse than the US, most went through a civil war, or coup, or they have dealt with rampant, criminal activity like violent drug smuggling cartels. And most of these nations are seeing this activity right now, or as recently as the 1980s or 90s. United States, 4.4, Revolutionary War was 250 years ago. The last time a foreign military occupied the U.S. mainland was during the War of 1812. The Civil War ended in 1865. The U.S. gun homicide rate is not the result of war, civil war, or military coups. Instead, what has created such a high gun homicide rate in the United States are the laws which make it easy for criminals to get guns. The United States gun homicide rate is 4.4 per 100,000 people. However, if we look at the gun homicide rate per state, we see some states are much worse than that. Some states have a gun homicide rate that would rank them 6th in the entire world. Some U.S. states have a gun homicide rate worse than the war-torn nations of Guatemala and Colombia. The 10 states in red have some of the weakest gun laws in the country. The 10 states in green have some of the strongest gun laws in the country. The pattern is clear. States with weak gun laws have far worse gun homicide rates than states with strong gun laws. Militia as terrorism extremists often point to strict gun laws in Chicago and its crime rate as proof that gun control laws don't work. But Illinois has a lower gun homicide rate than most states. And states such as California, New York, and Illinois have found that 2/3 of all guns used in crimes came from some state with weak gun laws. So, as low as those 3 states are, imagine if 2/3 of guns that criminals use were removed from the iron pipeline. The gun homicide rates in those 3 states would likely be cut in half. Last, but not least, Hawaii has some of the strongest gun laws in the nation, including universal background checks and registration. But more importantly, Hawaii is surrounded by 2,000 miles of ocean. No criminal in Hawaii is going to jump in a car and drive to a state with weak gun laws, buy a gun in a private sale, and drive back. One of the easiest ways for criminals to get guns is not available in Hawaii. The result? Hawaii has some of the lowest gun homicide rates in the entire nation. Hawaii shows what would be possible with universal background checks and registration across the entire nation. In the United States, approximately 70 to 80% of guns used in crimes come from states with weak gun regulations. So, yes, the gun homicide rate in the United States is terrible. It is at a level that one might expect in a war-torn banana republic. But whereas other nations suffered war which flooded their streets with weapons making it easy for criminals to get their hands on guns, the United States has some of the weakest gun laws in the world, where the only thing a criminal needs to get a gun is cash, a car, and a road trip to a state that allows private sales with no paperwork. Treason is not the reason for the Second Amendment. Treason is not the reason for the season.